everyone, it's Joanna here from Inspired by Stamping, and today I am so excited to share this watercolor plaid background tutorial with you. We're also going to be coloring this cute little flamingo too. So here's the stamp sets that we're going to be using. This is what our background basic lines look like, and here is our flamingo stamp set. It's just a 3x4 real cute little stamp set. So I've already put one of my background basic lines on an acrylic block, and we're using watercolor paper. Today I'm using some cold press watercolor paper. It's from Canson. You can use any kind of watercolor paper. We're using cold watercolor paper because cold press because we're going to use a lot of water, and cold press watercolor paper handles a lot of water compared to hot press. So I'm using some lined paper, as you can see in the background back there, and what we're going to do is we're going to line those up and those lines, and we're going to create the plaid markings. So I'm just going to quickly share with you, and I've sped up this video a little bit, so if not, it'd be about a half hour long, and we're just going to mark some lines here. And this is where we're going to place our line stamp set while we're stamping, and you're going to see exactly how I'm doing it. But first we just want to gently mark out where we want to place those lines. We really want to make sure when we're making these lines that we press really lightly. Once we're done stamping, we will go through and also erase all the little markings that we've made. So here are my distress inks, and I'm using worn lipstick, and I also put my little blending tool and my little foam pads underneath my ink so I can keep them nice and organized. They have a little Velcro on there. So I'm just going to use it. I'm going to dab my foam blending tool onto my stamp, and that just creates a nice effect onto the watercolor paper. It makes it really even, and so you don't have ink blobs that absorb really well into that watercolor paper, and it makes it easier to spread them out. Like, pardon my head, just trying to make sure that I can see exactly where I'm placing my stamps, making sure that they're nice and lined up. And I'm doing 3 colors, so I want to make sure we're doing every third one. So after we're done stamping, we're just going to take a number 5 brush, or even a larger brush. I'm just using a round brush. It's just what I had on handy. You can use any kind of brush to blend this in, but this is just what I had available at the time. I try to make sure I share with you guys in my videos that you don't need a whole lot of tools. It gets kind of expensive if we have to get a specific watercolor brush, so I just want to share with you that you can use any kind of watercolor brush. Now that I've gone through and got the lines wet just with some water and blended my ink directly without any color, I'm going to add some color to this and kind of create a darker edge, and then bringing it down to make it a little bit lighter. And this is really going to create that beautiful watercolor effect. And as you can see here, I'm just again pulling that beautiful color down and making it darker on one edge and then lighter on the next. If you don't have a marker, you're more than welcome to just turn that ink pad and stamp it directly on that porcelain plate. I've shared with that in a couple other videos, so you are more than welcome to do that as well if you don't have an ink pad and a marker. Next, I'm going to share with you how to use a marker directly on your stamp, and that also will help so much too, so you can still do it even if you don't have the markers or if you don't have the ink pads. Both ways will create a beautiful effect, and I think that you'll just enjoy this. So here I am just making sure that everything's nice and dark, and you can really see the vibrancy of the color. That worn lipstick is just such a beautiful, vibrant color. And what I'm going to do next is now I'm going to switch up the colors, and I'm going to go with the, I'm going to wash this off, and I just spritz a little bit of stamp cleaning, and I'm just using a nice little towel there and just wiping it off directly. And now we're going to switch out the colors. I'm going to be using a little bit of the green. It's called Cracked Pistachio, and I do not have the ink pad for this. I just have a marker, so I'm going to use the marker directly on my stamp, and then I'm going to go over with that blending tool and make sure it's nice and even, and it stamps beautifully, as you can tell. So what I ended up doing here is not using the marker again, but stamping again, and you can tell right here there's kind of a little bit of darker and a lighter edge, but that's okay because we're going to blend it all in with our water. And I just love this blending tool. It just creates a nice even stamped image for these watercolor projects that we're using here. So again, I'm just picking up some direct water. There's nothing else on it, and I love how dark that beautiful color is right there in that first line, so I don't really not going to play too much with it. But here I'm just blending it in, making sure it's nice and wet and nice and blended. We're going to be using that wet on wet, so everything's nice and wet already here. And I'm just going to mix, blend in that color, make sure it's nice and even, and then we'll go through and we'll darken it up again. So I'm just going to put the ink directly again on that porcelain plate and just kind of highlight a few little areas, making a little bit more of a watercolor effect. And then again, just continuously scratching on that porcelain plate and then just getting this next line nice and beautifully dark. And I really wanted to share with you with this line specifically that I didn't stamp it perfectly, as you could have seen when I first stamped it, but that's okay. Look how beautiful it's turning out when you add a little bit of water and a little bit more color. You can't even tell your mistakes. So don't worry if the first time you stamp down it does not look perfect. You just grab some water and that beautiful cold pressed watercolor paper will help move that ink around perfectly. So I'm also going to be using some scattered straw ink here, and that's my yellow that I'm going to be using. If you want to keep going darker and darker, just keep continuously going on and on. So here I'm switching over to that scattered straw, and I'm just using that blending tool again, but this time I'm going to stamp directly on that porcelain plate. I don't have a scattered straw marker. I realized that today. And so I had to stamp directly on that porcelain plate so I could make it nice and darker after we get through with this. So again, after I've stamped it, I'm going to pick up some water and I'm just going to blend in that color there. And I'm kind of picking up a little bit of that ink right here because I found it was just a little bit too light for my liking. So I really wanted to make it a lot darker. And you can do that as well. So you could just grab some ink and just color it beautifully. There is really actually no perfect way of doing this. It just all turns out beautifully. And I hope by sharing with a few different ways of coloring and stamping that it all turns out beautifully. So here I flipped it to the other side to create that plaid, and I'm going every two up the lines and adding a little bit of a very light dots so that I can see where I'm placing my next stamp and images on this way. And you can go every two, and this is kind of like my guide. I'm just using some paper that my kids had. I ripped it out of the back of one of their notebooks, and that just really helped me. So here I am. I'm going to be using some spun sugar, and I have that, that little tiny Velcro in the back of my ink pad like that, and that just helps me keep those foam circles nice and organized so they don't get mixed up, and I always know which one is which. So I'm stamping directly onto I'm inking up directly onto my stamp, and that just really creates a nice dark image, and I'm going back over it with the blending tool. Excuse my head again, I couldn't quite see, it's such a light color, and that just kind of blends it just evenly so that it's just really perfectly beautiful. And then you're just going to keep going over and over and just stamping those lines. And I'm just lining them up with those little pencil markings that I've had, but I'm making sure that I don't stamp directly over them. I'm kind of on the edge, and that just helps because when it's time to erase, sometimes that ink makes that pencil marking very hard to remove afterwards with the eraser. So now that I've stamped all the beautiful lines, I'm just going to go through and do the same technique again, using a little bit of the marker and then darkening it up. The watercolor that I've already put the other images on the other way is pretty dry, so it's really nice. It doesn't pick up a whole lot of ink, and if you want to, you can grab your heat embossing gun and just heat it a little bit, and that will also set it quicker if you don't want to wait for the ink to dry on the other way and you want to keep moving pretty quickly. So I'm just doing the same technique again. I'm just going over, and actually I'm just going to switch over to a different acrylic porcelain plate because I just found that watercolor marker just was not giving me the darkest image that I was really looking for. So here I am. So you can do with the marker onto the porcelain plate, or you can stamp again with that ink pad. And if you really want to, you could just directly take your marker and color just on it again, which I'm going to do here because I found that it was the water was kind of taking that tip out, and I was having a harder time getting that flow going back in that tip of that marker. It did pick up in a little bit, as you can see. Now it's kind of flowing again, but I found that it was really just having quite a little bit of hard time. I wanted it nice and dark. So after I got it wet here, I actually applied the marker directly to it, and I found that that was okay because it's a lighter color and it moved really well. You have to be careful with using markers directly on watercolor paper because it is a bit harder. So here's my Wink of Stella brushes. I have gold, silver, and clear, and I thought I would use the beautiful silver lines. So I'm just going to take my ruler and I'm just going to gently make lines here, and nothing particular. You're just going to have to make sure that you press really lightly, not hard. The harder you press down with these brushes, the thicker your line's going to be. And what I'm also doing, and you can't see here, is I'm actually wiping the ruler off every time so that I don't have a smudge or a marker smear with it. And I'm just going through very quickly, and I'm just placing lines like that. So there we have it, a beautiful plaid watercolor background, and the colors, we could just use so many colors. So next we're going to do our flamingo. So here I am just getting rid of those dots and those lines that we did earlier to make sure we had perfect placement. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to grab some of that worn lipstick again, and I'm going to change over my foam for my blending tool, and I'm just going to blend, take that blending tool and go directly onto my flamingo. And I'm using some watercolor paper. This is just some scratch paper, which I haven't cut down yet. Usually I stamp first and then I color it and then I'll cut it to size. I just kind of seem to like doing it that way. Anyways, perfectly fine. I'm going to again use that porcelain glass plate there and just scribble some worn lipstick marker onto it so we can make this a little bit darker. But first what I'm going to do is I'm just going over it with some water, very light water. I'm using a number 3 brush, so I've gone down a little bit in size, and we're just blending in that ink, making sure that it looks really beautiful, and going in the direction of form is where I think that the feathers would go, like in the beautiful flamingo. And here I'm just going through and again just spreading that ink, making it all even, using just a little bit of water, not too much, and just evening out that ink. And it's really starting to take form here. So now I'm going to grab some of that worn lipstick, and now I'm just going to darken up the edges. This is still wet, so we're doing a wet on wet. A wet on wet technique is really nice because you really don't have to blend too much, because the watercolor actually blends in with the water because the papers were already wet, so it naturally blends beautifully. So you can just move around some of that ink a little bit, and it has a natural blending effect going on here. And I'm just darkening up the edges here, and then I'm just going to darken up this neck. It's beautiful neck. Making sure that I'm not going over the eyes too much, because I am going to go through with a watercolor pen and I'm going to create some cute little eyelashes here in just a second. See, now that we're done with this, I'm just going to grab a uni pen here, and it is a fine line, and I'm using a number 2 one, and I'm just going to color over the legs here. And I just wanted to go over quickly with these legs. And I'm just drawing out first, and then I'm just darkening up. Just making them nice and black. And this is a watercolor pen, so you don't have to worry about it bleeding or any of the water getting in. These are my favorite pens that I have. And just kind of going over, sorry that you can see my head again, just making sure that I can see quite clearly. They're very small little lines. And I will make sure that I have all the supplies that I used listed on my YouTube page and also on our blog, so you can know exactly what I'm using here, so you won't have to worry or wonder what it was that I used. So after I finish coloring here, I'm just going to go over very lightly and create a little eye, and just make sure that the eye and those eyelashes are just popping with a little bit of black, and pink and black just really are vibrant colors together. So here we are, ready to put it all together now that everything's dry. And I'm just going to grab my stamp runner and add 3 little lines and line it up onto my cardstock. I've also went ahead and cut my flamingo to size with my Fisker trimmer. And I'm just going to reach over and grab my foam squares here. I keep them in a DVD case, a clear DVD case, and I always add an extra one in the middle, because I find that watercolor paper is a bit heavier and it has a tendency to sag over time when you get ready to send your card out. So I'm just going to line that up, and I'm also going to grab, I just saw that I've missed a little pencil marking here, so I've got to quickly erase that. I'm going to use some strawberry slush sequins, and just kind of pull it all out here. And also some of the Ultimate glue. That's my favorite glue that I use all the time. And just going to put a little dab on my finger and randomly place some of the sequins and any color that I like. I found that they really matched beautifully with the colors that I used today. And 3 on the top, and then just 2 down here below. And you can put more if you like, or less, or none at all, or you can add a little sentiment on the space right next to it. And so here's my cardstock. I did notice that for my demonstration today, I'm just going to use the stamp runner onto that cardstock there because the glue is a bit wet and I didn't want the sequins to move and create a little mess. So there we have it, 2 beautiful spring-like cards. If you have any questions or want to chat with me, I'm always available. You can email me. I hope that this tutorial was a good one for you. So thanks so much for stopping by and spending some time with me. Have a great day, guys.